That's silly. Why didn't I go for the 8?
Oh, nice.
I drew 11 and 12. That was terrible.
Anchovies.
And then I get half a star.
I'm gonna go for the 7.
Hello, my name is Now Crabtree and I make board games for a living. Today you are watching the first mission report for the game Food Time Battle in Space. Mission report is just a very thematic way of saying a development log. I'm going to be doing a series of development logs showcasing different aspects of development of Food Time Battle in Space, my next upcoming board game for Kickstarter. So for this episode, I'm going to be going through the past 2 weeks, very intense 2 weeks that is, of development for Food Time Battle in Space. It was very intense because it was the very last weeks before the games were sent off to print for manufacturing. Now this wasn't the final print run of the game because that's going to be what's funded by the Kickstarter, but this was a very small print run of games for reviewers to get their hands on and make review videos with. Now the 3 elements of development that are required to make sure your game is as perfect as possible before it gets sent off to printing is playtesting, feedback, and iteration. Which I am glad to say I have managed to get heaps of thanks to friends and people in the community that just are very interested in what Crab Studios has to make next. And on that note, I would like to quickly mention our Discord. There is a Discord called Crab Studios. I will leave a link to it in the description, where its primary focus is getting the community together and talking about Crab Studios as well as other board games and just genuinely having fun. But also it is a hub for all playtesters that are interested in playtesting Crab Studios games. There is a channel on there called Playtesting Announcements, and anytime there is going to be a playtesting session, I'll usually post about it the day before. There will be an announcement there where you can put your name forward and get in on the action when it comes to playtesting. But yeah, all you need to do is join the Discord and have Tabletop Simulator on Steam. But anyway, that's it, let's just get to it. So, just to give you some context, if you don't know anything about the game, if you haven't been following us on social media, then I'm going to be doing a what is FTB in space in 1 minute. So it is a quick pick up and play retro themed card game for 2 to 4 players. You own your own restaurant on the moon in the 1950s, and your aim is to be the first to get a 5-star rating for your restaurant. Now you do this by completing critic orders, but if you use enough luxury ingredients to complete a critic order, then you gain their ability, which is very important for later on. Now the way a turn works is that when you choose which critic order to complete, you draw 3 cards because that is your hand size limit. But the problem is that you have to place down these ingredients in order, and these ingredients have a specific order that they have to go in. So the tricky part of the game is that once you played those 3 cards down and you pick up another 3 to try and complete the order, you have to place down cards continuing in that sequence. So if you've just picked up cards which are lower than any card placed down in the current sequence, you can't place it down. Now you might be thinking this sounds kind of impossible, especially when you know there are only 12 ingredients in your deck, and some critics require 9 ingredients to complete it. But like I mentioned before, you have the critic abilities, and if you complete the orders with enough luxury ingredients, which are gold ingredients rather than blue ingredients, then you gain their abilities, which are super important to be able to complete those much more difficult critic orders. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You use critic abilities, you play ingredients in the correct order, and it's first to 5 stars. But yeah, moving on to the first of the 2 weeks. My first week consisted primarily of what I've been doing for a few months now, which is playtesting. However, this time I playtested with a purpose. Previously it was just to make sure the game was fun, make sure it flowed well, and just to make sure everyone was having a good time when they were playing it. But now that I knew the game was fun, I knew the hook was perfect, I knew there was enough randomness and enough strategy, I needed to make sure the game was balanced. There are 4 restaurants in the game, and each restaurant has their own set of critics separate from everyone else. And on top of that, these critics are designed to work well together for each restaurant. By that I mean their abilities synergize really well. So for example, with the Tranquil Sushi restaurant, all their critics are focused on discarding cards but benefiting from doing so. So for example, there's a card where you can discard 2 cards and reduce the amount of ingredients required for a critic by 1, which might sound okay on its own, but there is another critic which will allow you to put those 2 cards you discarded back into your hand. So if you use them all together, then you can get really good combos. So with that in mind, and with the fact that all these abilities are so different and also separate from each other, I needed to make sure these restaurants were as balanced as possible so everyone could have a fair and fun time. And to do this, along with two of my friends, we played the game constantly every day for about a week. We managed to get like an hour or two of gameplay in per day, which is very, very good considering I don't pay them. They just do it because they really, really enjoy the game and also they want to help me out. And after every single game, I used Google Sheets and I tracked every single game. So I tracked which restaurants were played during that game. There are 4 restaurants and only 3 of us, so I had to keep track of that. I tracked which restaurants won and also how many stars each restaurant gained. The stars are quite important because I also tracked stars per game. Because if a restaurant, for example, didn't have the best win percentage, but had an amazing stars per game, like got 4 stars consistently every single game, then I am less worried about balancing that restaurant than I am balancing a restaurant that had like, I don't know, 10% win percentage and only got 1 or 2 stars per game, because then whoever's playing that deck is just not going to have a fun time. Now you need to keep in mind when looking at the spreadsheet that there is data in there before buffs and nerfs were taking place, so even though hand size and playing has a slight decrease in percentage to drawing and discard, they are much closer than how they seem, just because hand size and playing used to be much worse and there is data in there from when they were much worse. But yeah, after that first week, I got to the point where I didn't even really need to playtest the balancing anymore. I didn't need to gather that much data. What I really needed to do is start doing some blind playtests and getting feedback that way. Now, the difference between a regular playtest and a blind playtest is with a regular playtest, you are testing out the fun, you're testing the balancing, you're just testing the overall enjoyment of the game and whether it's good or not. But with a blind playtest, you are testing the fundamental understandability of the game. Now, this primarily comes down to the instruction manual, but there are heaps of other little details, especially when it comes to the graphic design of the cards themselves, that are super important to test. So something which is obvious on a card, like for example, we had some issues with people just not understanding what the number in the top left of the card mean. For me, that was painfully obvious, but obviously it was because I'm the one who made the game. I know everything about the game. So not only do I want to get fresh eyes on the game, people have never seen the game before, to be able to read the instruction manual and see if they understand it from that, I also need them to play the game and see whether the cards make sense. Thankfully, I've done a couple of blind playtests and one went incredibly well. I think this is down to the fact that it was 2 players playing completely separate from me. The other blind playtests involved me in the game. I couldn't say anything, but I could still play it, so they would look at me and they would see what I was doing on my turn, and then they would copy me, and it didn't really lead to a very natural experience. But when I had 2 playtesters completely blind playing themselves, they read the instruction manual themselves, they read it together. If someone got one of the rules wrong, the other person would correct them, which was super satisfying to see. And overall, there was very, very minor questions, and those questions were resolved in the updated instruction manual, which I used later on.
So, I'm just getting confused about the head chef thing. So with the head chef abilities, so draw an additional card, refresh critical ability, start working over time. Can you... What does it say? You can use the... as long as it's fresh when they use it. So can you only do one thing per turn with the head chef?
That's correct.
So if you refresh critic ability, that's the only thing that head chef can do.
Yeah,
that turn.
Yeah, but you can still do an order, but you can't use the head chef. Yeah.
All right. Okay, I get that now. Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, it was incredibly satisfying just to see those 2 play, and they played a couple of games. Not only did they really enjoy the game, but what was most important about that playtesting session is that they understood the game. So yeah, throughout the 2 weeks, I focused heavily on iteration because that is important for any product, but especially board games, especially when you're in the playtesting phase. If you're playtesting but not iterating, then there's no point in playtesting. And I did minor tweaks here and there, of course to the cards and balancing, but with the instruction manual as well. Not only did I use feedback from the blind playtests, but I also put it on Reddit, which I highly recommend. If you're a board game designer, go to Tabletop Game Design. Incredibly useful resource for you to use. just make sure that you have a thick skin, because when you put anything on there, it usually gets ripped to shreds. But yeah, I put the instruction manual up on there as well as some art and just getting general feedback from there so I can iterate on it. But yeah, there was a bunch of minor tweaks. There was a few complaints about the first page being not as visual as it should be, especially when talking about the individual decks of cards. So what I did is I added a little explainer to which decks were which, visually right at the start of the instruction manual. But yeah, there was also just a few like explanations which I needed to add, and there's one explanation actually which I just completely forgot, which was what happens when you fail an order. Just for reference, when you fail an order, you lose half a star, but I just completely forgot to add that into the instruction manual. One Redditor was like, yo, what actually happens when you fail an order? And I was like, oh yeah. So I added that in, of course. But the biggest one, which was something which I refused actually, it was not bad on my part, I refused to act on until I got some explanation as to why, which isn't something you should really do when getting playtester feedback. Playtesters aren't trained in game design. They're not trained in graphic design and they're not trained in visual design. They don't often know why they feel the way they do. But it wasn't until I got the explanation that I acted on it, which was bad on my part. Basically, the instruction manual initially was black with white text. And for me personally, I found that much more easy to read, but above all else, I thought it was much prettier than a white background with black text. But eventually someone, after about 3 complaints about it, which is quite a lot considering my sample size was maybe about 30 or 40 people, 3 people is quite a significant amount. So yeah, the feedback was that the black background and with white text on it wasn't suitable for people with dyslexia. Now, that wasn't something which people mentioned previously, but someone explained that to me, and then I just was like, okay, that change needs to happen. Dyslexic people is quite a chunk of any product's audience, so you obviously need to cater to them as much as you possibly can. But yeah, just moving quickly back to the game itself, there was one significant change that I made in the last week that came from one of the 2 playtesters which I play with most often. And that was that every game ends up being the same. Now again, there wasn't instant solutions to this problem. This problem was brought up a couple of times beforehand and I was just trying to dismiss it because from my perspective, when I wasn't playing with the 2 playtesters that were playing constantly, every game was more different, every game was more unique. But then I had to realize that these 2 playtesters are an example of what players will be like if they enjoy the game enough and they play it over and over and over again and understand the meta of the game and what's most important and what's the best strategies. And I also need to cater to those people as well, not just the people that are playing the game for the first time. So the problem was that the best strategy in Food Time Battle in Space was to complete the first 4 level 1 critics. There are 3 levels of critics and they represent the difficulty as well. So level 1 is easy, level 2 is quite difficult, and level 3 is pretty much impossible until you get a bunch of abilities. So what players do is they complete all the level 1 cards and get all of their abilities. But when they did that, each level 1 card was worth half a star. They would already be on 2 stars, and then they'd go straight away to the level 3s because they had the tools in order to complete it. And then they'd be on 4 stars, and then they'd just get the level 2 critic, and then they win the game. And that would happen every single time. Now, one way we could do it is we could just say screw thematics, and we can make the star count for the goal much higher. Alternatively, what we could do is we could make level 3 cards be worth less. But then no player would go for the level 3 cards. The reason why players go for level 3 cards is because they are worth 2 stars. And no level 2 card is worth 2 stars, no level 1 card is worth 2 stars. 2 stars is quite a significant amount of stars towards your goal. So finally, we came to the realization that the 3 ingredient level 1 cards, because they're in the level 1 deck, there are 2 3 ingredient cards and there are 2 4 ingredient cards. We decided to change the 3 ingredient cards to just not be worth any stars. So if you completed all 4 cards in the level 1 deck, you'd only be on 1 star rather than 2 stars. People will still want to complete the level 1 critics because they want the abilities, but they will no longer be almost halfway towards the goal of the game. This led to longer games, and this led to many more variations of strategy, and it became almost a completely different game every single time you played, which was really, really cool. So yeah, thank you once again to that playtester. That was probably one of the more valuable pieces of feedback that I have gotten. FDB in Space has gone through heaps of iteration. Now, I'm going to be covering this in a different mission report where I cover like from the start of the game to the end of the game. I'm going to be doing that at some point, and that's probably going to be quite a long video. But it's gone through heaps of iteration. It used to be a game where it didn't have any abilities at all, and it was kind of just a very, very impossible game where you just relied completely on luck, to this very strategic, simple yet fun game. And that was all down to playtesting, feedback, and iteration. Right, okay, so thank you all for watching. I am going to be attempting to post a mission report once a month up until the release of the game on Kickstarter, which should hopefully be around February time next year. And each mission report is going to be focusing on a different aspect of development that's involved in making a board game from concept to Kickstarter. Now again, I would just really like to promote the Discord. It's a great community, a great place, a bunch of great people in there, and of course you get to playtest along with me. I'm going to keep continuing to playtest Food Time Battle in Space even though it's now gone off to printing, just because I want to be able to catch any sort of buffs or nerfs that I need to add into the game for the final release. And also just to see if anybody's got any feedback on the fun factor as well. My friends find it fun, all the other people that have played the game find it really fun, but there might be some helpful feedback that's yet to be said to me. So I implore you to check out the link in the description below. So yeah, that's it from me. Hopefully you enjoyed this mission report, and I shall see you in the next one. Goodbye.